efficiency, it's going to drive on efficiency,
Yeah.
self-sufficiency of the country, labour's also a big role. What's your side?
Cost,
Yeah.
public perception, people want to see cows grazing, and
age of workforce.
Probably even that.
Right, that's your 5 minutes up.
Ladies and gentlemen, British agriculture is experiencing some of its toughest times since World War II. Should more farmers be looking to technologies to increase production and efficiency? Tonight, my panel will discuss that robotic milking is the way forward. I will start proceedings by introducing my panel. To my near right is our proposer, Mr. Andrew Taylor.
Good evening.
To my near left, our opposer, Mr. Scott Anderson.
Good evening.
And to my far left, our arbiter, Miss Fiona Cuthbertson.
Good evening.
Andrew, our proposer, is from a family dairy farm working alongside 3 generations. His papa, his dad, and himself, the boy. Looking to invest in dairy technologies in the coming year with the instalment of robots to give him an extra hour in his bed. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew will propose that robotic milking is the way forward. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the UK food system is broken. We are only 60% self-sufficient in food, and all the while we have an acute labour shortage in agriculture, driving many people out of dairy farming. With Scotland ideally placed to milk cows, I firmly believe that we should embrace technology to grow the dairy sector. That is why I am in no doubt that robotic milking is the way forward. Speaking to many dairy farmers locally, the number one issue on farm is labour. Since leaving the EU, less people have been coming to this country to help on farms. Not only that, people here want to work less hours and more sociable hours. Gone are the days where somebody would start at 4 AM 7 days a week, especially after a night out. That's simply not going to happen. Robots change this. With cows milking themselves, you don't need to be out at the crack of dawn every morning. And it also allows the farmer to be more flexible and workers to be more flexible with their time throughout the day. Technology also offers farming to become more exciting, attracting a new range of people into the industry. Those who have a computer background or those who are interested in electronics, not just those who want to be at the cow's tail all day. It's not the drudgery. It's a more highly skilled job with more cows per person and more milk per labour unit. This is helping farming finances. Ladies and gentlemen, the extra milk output also helps drive self-sufficiency within the UK. With the less stress on cows by being milked more often, this raises milk yield by up to 10%. Cows are also lasting a lot longer on these systems, further boosting output. Food security is at the forefront in this country since the Ukraine war. We must be more self-sufficient, not only as a country, but we have a huge worldwide population to feed. By 2050, there will be 9.7 billion people on the planet. These are a lot of hungry mouths needing fed. Ladies and gentlemen, robots also offer massive efficiency gains on farm. With milk yield up, longevity increasing, the technology offers massive improvements to the farm. Not only that, but with the advancements in technology within these robots, early detection of diseases is also possible. For example, mastitis picked up through conductivity and lameness picked up through visits. Not only that, but just yesterday, Lely announced the Lely Zeta using artificial intelligence to track cows throughout the shed, further picking up on diseases far quicker than any human can. Not only is this driving efficiency, it is also helping animal welfare on farm. With farm farm finance is so tight, this is how to save the dairy farm in the UK through greater efficiencies. And robots allow this. Through more milk and reduced costs, it's a win-win. One of the ways where massive savings and costs can be made is through challenge feeding. This is where cows are fed the exact amount of feeding required for their milk yield. This is only possible through the technology and robots and cannot be done in a milking parlour. This allows massive savings in feed and also helps to massively reduce the carbon footprint of these dairy farms. Ladies and gentlemen, agriculture is going through massive changes. Whether it's subsidy, labour shortages, environmental regulations, or financial pressures, they are all putting strain on the UK dairy farms. I believe technology can solve all of these problems, and that is why I am in no doubt that robotic milking is a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You left no uncovered ground and cultivated many areas of our topic tonight. We will now turn over the table to our opposer, Scott. Scott is a sales rep for Cars Bellington and sees day-to-day good stockmanship on many farm visits and believes there is no replacement for this. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott will oppose that robotic milking is the way forward. Scott.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 40% of the Scottish UK dairy farmers cannot afford to pay themselves minimum wage. The average age of our farmers is well into their 60s, with a lack of knowledge on modern technology. And the industry as a whole is under more scrutiny than ever, with public perception at an all-time low and veganism on the rise, due to concerns with animal welfare. This is why I firmly believe that robotic milking is not the way forward. My first argument against robotic milking tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is the sheer cost of installation. On average, to install a robot, farmers will have to pay £100,000 per robot. So, for an average herd size of 220 cows, that is a layout of £400,000 plus building work. Never mind the constant call-out and service fees that will follow in the years to come. Banks have also recently worked out that farmers often borrow again after 8 years to renew these robots, whereas a lower investment in a parlour in the first place would last 5 times this before further investment was needing to be made. Ladies and gentlemen, when interest rates are uncomfortably high and loans are harder than ever to get, I would argue that this investment is simply not worth it. And this sort of financial strain can only increase the mental health crisis that we have in our industry. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew also mentioned in his speech that there is a labour crisis within agriculture in this country, which, yes, is correct. However, robots are not the answer to this. I work with many robot units through my job with Cars Bellington, and not one of them, after installing robots, has laid their staff off. Jobs on the farm just change. Instead of the old-fashioned good stocksmanship and the pride of seeing your cows coming into the milking parlour bursting full of milk, farmers are now spending their life pushing cows into a robot because a computer says that they are due to be milked. Andrew also said that staff don't need to be in call 24/7. However, I would strongly disagree with this, as they do in case of robot failures. You only need to look and see at the news the constant computer viruses that we have in this country can ground planes, never mind what they can do to a farmer's robotic system. And ladies and gentlemen, my dad struggles to send a text, never mind understand what code 136B means when 20 cows are needing milked at 3 o'clock in the morning. Public scrutiny is also at an all-time high in the sector, with many milk contracts now requiring that cows are milked for at least 6 hours per day. Robots simply do not work in this system. I see through work that when people install robots, they need to keep free time of the robot to an all-time low and visits to a high to make their investment work. These are simply not practical in grazing systems, and it would only increase labour with people needing to go and fetch cows from the field and walk them into the robot constantly. You also only need to look at a major farming business in the dairy industry, Farming Partners, who recently have changed one of the biggest robotic herds in the country to a spring block calving and grazing style system. This proves that robotic systems are not the way forward and simply not what the consumer wants. Andrew also mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to be more food secure in this country. However, Andrew, this is simply not possible. It takes 1 acre to feed a human for the year. Now, to do basic maths, there is 66 million people in this country and only 60 million acres. And when you take into consideration that in areas like Muirkirk, it takes 10 acres to feed a blackie yow for the winter, it's just simply not possible. Ladies and gentlemen, joking aside, robotic dairies are not worth the risk. Money is too expensive right now, and it is simply not what the customer wants. This is why I firmly believe that robotic dairying is not the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. You sowed many opposing seeds to our topic tonight and began to establish an argument against Andrew. However, I will now invite Andrew back to the field to propose his argument to Scott and further take us through the growth stages of our topic. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to take issue with some of the points that Scott raised in his speech. Scott talked about the lack of availability of grazing with robots. However, the only Scottish entrant in the Farmers' Weekly Awards this year is a grazing herd with robots, and they're in the Grass Manager finalist because they can do such an amazing job grazing grass with cows on robots. These farms that you talk about, Scott, that are housed with robots, they would have housed their cows anyway, robots or not. They would simply be milking through a parlour 3 times a day. And Scott, you talked about call-outs. My neighbour has 3 robots. He's had 1 call-out in 6 months out of his bed. Now, most farmers are out more often checking their cows for calving late at night, or dealing with late night calvings, or maybe a breakout. Once every 6 months, that is nothing compared to getting a long lie every morning rather than having to be up at 4 or 5 in the morning to milk your cows. Scott, you talked about cost as well, but have you priced a new conventional milking parlour recently? You've still all that money to outlay. It's just as expensive as robots, plus you need to be up early in the morning, so you've even longer in the day to stress about all that money borrowed. We need these robots to drive the output to help farm finances. And lastly, Scott, you talked about scrutiny, but through these robots we can collect more data to show the welfare benefits of these cows, which is far more beneficial to milk buyers to show the general public. Mr. Chairman, this is why I'm in no doubt still that robotic milking is the way forward for British agriculture.
Thank you, Andrew. I will now invite both speakers to the field for a period of open debate, where I ask that they remain seated and I hope we can further ripen our topic for you, the consumer. Scott, Andrew said in his speech about UK self-sufficiency. Surely this could only be a good thing for British agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Andrew did mention self-sufficiency, but these robotic herds, they're just becoming ever more intensive, which is just leading to more imported fertiliser. I see it in my job, robot herds, their feed consumption is far higher than grazing herds. And where do we think this feed comes from? Soya and many key components of dairy cow cake comes from areas like South America. How can this be self-sufficient? It is only increasing food miles.
But Mr. Chairman, Scott, by allowing these robots in, it frees up time and management time to further improve the efficiency of the grass growth on farm and also to grow more cereals to feed these cows on these robot systems. You take many farms with a milking parlour, people are running about so hard all the time, they don't have the time to even try and grow cereals.
Yes, Andrew, I understand what you're saying, but many of these cows and robots are being pushed that hard that in some herds they're only averaging 2.5 lactations. This simply isn't sustainable.
Scott, that's
thank you, boys. I think we better castrate that debate there. Andrew, Scott mentioned in his speech that money is becoming harder to borrow. How can farmers risk the strain of investment into robotic technology?
Well, Mr. Chairman, many farms need to invest to keep themselves moving forward, or they'll simply fall backwards. Now, whether it's investing into robots or investing into a milking parlour, both are a lot of money, and both shouldn't be entered into lightly. So it's regardless of what system you go down, dairy farming, you need to borrow money. And that's one of the points that Scott can't get into his head, that with so much money involved in dairy farming now, we need to drive efficiency and drive output on these farms by increasing milk yield through robots.
Andrew, I would have to argue that we are very fortunate right now that we are in an expansion zone where the cost of feed allows, compared to the cost of milk, allows for expansion. But if you take that over a 3-year average, it isn't often that this is the case, and I still believe that borrowing these large sums of money when interest rates are high is simply too risky.
Well, thank you boys for your comments, but going by tonight's timings, it's now time to pass to our arbiter, Fiona, to harvest our topic. Fiona is a primary school teacher and is currently in the hunt for supply work as jobs become ever harder to get in the teaching industry. And she's more than used to sorting out squabbling children like our two panellists here tonight. So Fiona will assure you, the consumer, who had the strongest argument. Fiona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stepped on stage tonight and heard my team members delve into the topic that robotic milking is the way forward, I was less than surprised to hear of its agricultural theme. And I knew that the subject would provoke some interesting debate between our farming mads proposer and opposer, as well as allowing you, our audience, to consider this topical issue. Our proposer, Andrew, plugged in electricity to open tonight's debate with a well-formed argument in support of robotic milking being the way forward. Firstly, Andrew was keen to express that there are massive staffing issues and labour shortages within the agricultural industry, and that robots would cut the need for staff and make it more desirable for those who were involved, perhaps also encouraging younger people to get involved with more sociable hours. He also discussed that we need to become more self-sufficient, and that robotic milking could aid us to do this by producing more food. Finally, he also mentioned the improvement in efficiency and management, with cows' lactations increasing and their longevity being ever better through robots. Next, our opposer Scott took us back a few decades to an old stable parlour to counter Andrew's argument by stating that the cost of installing robotic systems and running them day to day simply could not be dreamt of by many farmers, especially when loans are ever harder to claim. Furthermore, he also expressed that there can be so many issues with robotic milkers working perfectly and consistently all of the time, and it's difficult to have someone on call at all hours of the day. Ultimately, farmers need just as many staff, so it's not helping in that form. Lastly, he mentioned that with robotic milking systems, cows are not able to get outside and grazing, and this can be a huge issue when it comes to consumer perception. In his reply, Andrew was passionate that some farms have reported better grazing systems after implementing robotic milkers, and that the benefits of some more long lines outweighs the disadvantages of a few late-night call-outs. As we reached the beginning of today's debate, it was clear that neither a proposer or opposer were sitting on the fence. Scott was quick to inform us that farmers are not becoming more self-sufficient, as the more intensive we get, the larger amounts of feed and fertiliser are being imported. However, Andrew's robots powered on in front and kept producing more key points, as he was keen to express that robotic farmers have more time to grow their own crops and cereals, and furthermore also argued that dairy farming systems require large investments regardless of whether it's robots or a traditional parlour. Now, although having grown up in a working dairy farm, my knowledge of this topic was minimal prior to tonight's debate. So I think that maybe I should take the boys home with me for a debate with my dad over the kitchen table. But ladies and gentlemen, today I believe that through his convincing argument and clear competence during the debate, that our proposer had the strongest case. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Andrew has proved that the efficiency and production benefits, as well as better welfare, means robotic milking has to be the way forward for British agriculture. where a Scots argument had to be condemned and put down the drain in believing that the severe investment and need for skilled staff is far too big a risk in our current challenging times. Thank you and good night.
Well, it's a good job we didn't do that. Oh no.